How you doing, guys? Welcome back to Coffee and Juice. A lot of times when things happen, I like to let the dust settle. I like to let things flesh out a little bit. Regarding Joe Aesthetics, may he rest in peace, a lot of people came out immediately. The kid's body wasn't even cold yet, and they started speculating on what went wrong with him. I'm going to give you an overview of what I think went wrong with him. Now, this is coming from a space or a place where I've been a patient regarding testosterone replacement for the last 17 years. And also I went off on the horizon and I've done super supplements. All I'm trying to say is that part of this you have to realize is that if you're going to run TRT or gear, you need to have an army of doctors that are overseeing everything that you're doing. Now, why this is important is because, remember, Joe Aesthetics was in Thailand. Now, once again, health insurance or not, a lot of the tests that you need are very, very prohibitively expensive in the US. It could be in Thailand, or certain times they're not even really available unless there's a dire situation. Now, also coupled with the fact that this individual admits that he had 4 jabs of the cough, et cetera, et cetera. Now we can speculate with all these things coupled together. These were contributing factors from his early demise. Let's get into it. And what we can do now is that now this is a platform to learn from, to see where you're at, and you can kind of basically reflect on, are you doing these things? Do you have these things, or you do not? All right, so let's stick around, let's talk about it, and let's be smart. A lot of times I bring up the fact that I've been a TRT patient plus for the last 17 years. So a lot of you are like, oh, why is that important? I've been on TRT 6 months. I know everything. The problem is that once you start to layer or go deeper in the well, years upon years of being on this particular compound or a multitude of polypharmacy, you're going to need an army of doctors if you're smart. If you just do things willy-nilly and you don't care and you think everything's going to be okay, the problem is that you might also get jammed up or basically meet an early grave, so to speak. Now, personally, if we want to extrapolate and learn, a cardiologist is number one. You need that in your pocket. Now, a lot of you are like, why? Well, number one is that he's going to run your LipoFit or NMR, meaning he's going to take a deep dive into your cholesterol. Number two, he's the guy who gives you your stress test and also looks at the diagnostic regarding that. He's also going to be looking at your blood pressure. He's also going to be giving you a transthoracic echogram or echocardiogram, the EKGs. All these things are quite important regarding your overall health. Plus, when you run gear, you also may have to look at, or at least keep metrics on, is there any cardiac remodeling or, once again, hypertrophy regarding what's going on in your heart. Now, the cardiologist, once again, is a standard. Number two, as you go deeper in the game, you might need a hematologist. Once again, we talk about cancers in the blood, but more importantly and more commonly, you're going to notice that your hematocrit, your hemoglobin, and the width of your red blood cells are going to change, and it's going to get higher, meaning that your blood is more viscous. And then once again, what you could run into is a stroke, aneurysm, blood clot, etc. Now, we have a cardiologist, a hematologist. I also have an endocrinologist who oversees the hormones. Now, when it comes to an endo, to be honest with you, do you really need an endo? I'm not 100% sure what they're really doing for you, but a lot of times they're going to be the ones that legitimately, what's important, who's going to cut you your script. All right, so keep that in mind. You might need an endo. Maybe you also need an internist. But now, as we start the conversations, you're going to be like, well, this sounds like it's going to cost a lot of money. Now, if you haven't figured it out, either you belong to a compounding pharmacy or you get underground laboratory stuff, whatever it might be. This is an expensive pursuant, or basically you're pursuing something that's very costly because you want to look and feel a certain way. Now, another thing you need to consider is this. You might need a pulmonologist. The reason why, once you get bigger, your neck's going to get thicker, the tissues are going to grow from you being on the compounds. So you might get basically self-inflicted sleep apnea. Now, the pulmonologist is going to test you and may once again say, hey, you know what, buddy? You need a CPAP machine. So now, once again, you got to run a CPAP, which could be expensive. They're like $1,000 to $1,500. And then once again, we talk about being overseas, something personally I dealt with being in Indonesia as well as Thailand. You finding distilled water is like almost like finding a unicorn the majority of the time. So now we talk about the pulmonologist. That's something that you might need. And once again, we talk about a complication. When you have sleep apnea, that also can raise your hematocrit or hemoglobin. So now we have all these things in mind, and I'm giving you it's a pretty stringent overview. If you're on TRT, what can happen? And if we dial back to Joe Aesthetics, we could argue speculatively, and I'm not looking to hurt anyone's feelings, that if you look at the before and the after, it's basically been a decade of this guy running UGL, whatever he could get his hands on to give him that physique. Granted, great structure, hyper elite, whatever you want to call the guy can make his muscles move, and that's great. But the problem is there's nothing that's going to be more transformative than you running all that gear. So let's be honest on that. So now we have 10 years of doing that. Now I keep mentioning UGL. Now why that's important, remember I live in Thailand. The Thailand gear sometimes, a lot of stuff's coming out of China. Actually, the majority of stuff's coming out of China. Now your UGL may have more heavy metals than others. What I'm trying to say is that how pure is the product that you're using, that you're putting into your body, is a question that you need to ask yourself. And obviously you will be the one to assess, is it worth it or it is not? So just keep that in mind when we talk about the guy running 4 grams or 5 grams of gear a week. What's the quality? What's the inflammation that's going on? And then we also talk about hematology, and we talk about potential clotting that is in the blood. So now when it comes to the cough or the 4 jabs that he admits to, and once again, like I keep telling you, especially in that region of the world, I was living there during COVID. Believe me when I tell you, if you thought it was strict in the United States on what you couldn't do, there's things called jurisdiction of provinces in Thailand. As an example, if you live in Rawai Beach, you couldn't leave Rawai Beach, meaning you couldn't say, hey, I'm going to go to Rawai to now Patong. The cops are out in full force. And if you know anything, you do not play around down there in Thailand. You'll end up, in prison indefinitely, or you're going to have to, potentially off a large chunk of change. So now, who's to say what an experimental drug will do to you? Obviously, things are coming out now, and it seems that 2 to 3 years later, or even sooner than that, depending on your genetic makeup, or once again, I always talk about biodiversity. Who knows what this did to people or what it's doing to people? So what I think potentially would happen, and once again, this is all speculative, if you talk about the gear use, the dehydration, the caloric deficit, okay, plus all the things we're talking about with the cough, the gear. Once again, just to reiterate, we're talking about viscous blood. And we also talk about money talks, bullshit walks. And what I mean is that if you don't have buku dollars to say every 3 to 4 months, I'm looking at my biomarkers, I'm getting specialized tests, I'm doing this or that with my cardiologist, and there's no oversight, this is when people in general run into problems. Or maybe they're just not aware of what they need because they think, and once again with the younger generation, remember I'm almost 50, is that everything's tren ace, tren heck. All I'm trying to say is that, remember, when it comes to certain compounds, you don't know how they're prepared. They could be, made in somebody's bathtub or cooked in somebody's kitchen. So look, coffee and juice, take care of yourself. And Joe Aesthetics, may you rest in peace. I wish you much love, and that's it. All right, we'll talk soon.